Coverage of NCBA's CattleCon 2024 is brought to you by Alltech. Working together for a planet of plenty. Find out more by going to alltech.com. And welcome back to Real Ag Radio, broadcasting here from the NCBA CattleCon convention in Orlando, Florida. We're keeping up on all things happening in the North American cattle industry, the markets and trade and the consumer. Lots being discussed here this week, of course. Hey, ran into Nathan Phinney. He is chair of the Canadian Cattle Association based out in the Maritimes. Hey, Nathan, how's it going?
Good, Sean. How are you?
Good. Okay, where's the home ranch again?
Just outside of Moncton, New Brunswick. I'm pretty much on the New Brunswick-Nova Scotia border.
And moisture conditions at home. You're more on the wet side than, especially comparatively speaking to some of the cattle producers out in Western Canada, but almost too much moisture at sometimes, right?
Yeah, we have. This year has been almost flood year. I speak to my Western counterparts and wish we could figure out a way to pipeline some of that water out west to even things out. But yeah, we've been having too much water and has made cropping very difficult this year.
Well, we can't get energy pipelines built in Canada. Maybe a moisture pipeline. That would be nice. Okay, so for you, I'm sure this is a very, very busy week. There are some of your counterparts, of course, from the U.S. and as well as Mexico. What are you trying to accomplish in a week like this?
Yeah, we have a couple of big files that we're working on. Obviously, one of the big one is the voluntary product to U.S. that we're having meetings on and collaborating with, our U.S. and Mexican counterparts. Trade, obviously, for our industry is the main focal point. Without trade, we don't have a sustainable industry, and the amount of dollars that trade brings into our industry is it's the foundations of what we're built on. So focusing on some of these trade barriers and some of these trade issues, we really have to recognize, and I hope our policy makers from all three countries in North America realize that we have the largest beef integrated system on live cattle and in the world, and that is important to realize, and we need to maintain that if we're looking to be global leaders.
Yesterday, as always at this meeting, this isn't, I think some of this goes back in time. There was probably an original reason for the meeting to happen, but it's continued. The tri-lateral meeting between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. Is that the main part of focus? Is how do we hold this integrated system together? Like, what's the purpose of that meeting?
I think that meeting in itself has really shown the value of collaboration and how well we work when we work together. A couple of years ago, or last year, I guess I was at the meeting, we put out a joint letter to our trade and ag ministers and secretaries in our respective countries, stating that North American production system is leading the world in sustainability and production and food safety. And that's what we're going to adhere to. When we feel outside pressures coming from, across the pond at times of certain greenwash ideas, that may be fine in their situation, but it's not what we do here in North America, and we do it as well as anybody. So we use that forum as a platform to collaborate on international issues and stand together as a continent on what it is we do.
You mentioned across the pond. We're seeing, especially from not as much in the U.S. here, but from a Canadian perspective, any time that I hear that, well, this is the way that Europe's doing it, I just sort of cringe, I get a little itchy. It just sort of makes me like, that I don't know, that's not, and maybe that's being a little bit too close-minded from my standpoint, but boy, I think history kind of shows that that's not necessarily the path we want to follow in regards to some of these protocols and things.
Yeah, if you're going to have good trade policy and good regulation, they need to be science and rules-based. And we feel like that's the foundations as well, that our industries in North America are built off of science and rules-based. And if the science shows that we're doing something inaccurate or wrong, we as an industry adopt that and we make the changes to make sure that it's fundamentally sound. Some of the ideologies and the political atmospheres in these other countries and the pressures that they're feeling doesn't necessarily align itself with science. And our message has been strong and clear that if you're going to have good trade policies, regardless of the governments of the day and respective countries, that's the foundations that you need to build it off of and hold those to those standards. So that's where we're coming at this as a North American side of things, is, if the science shows we are wrong, we will fix it. But as it stands, we are leading the globe in sustainability side of things and in healthy and safe food production, and that's what we're going to hold ourselves to.
Is CCA, I guess, supportive of what's happened and with the issue with the UK on the trade talks, where the UK's walked away from Canada? There's been big time frustration trying to get Canadian beef products into the UK, into the EU, period. Are you supportive of the position in the federal government, how they're approaching this, or does something need to be changed up?
I thank our government for taking a hard line on this. This stems back to an ongoing issue for quite some time that we haven't got resolved. And, it is disappointing to see the UK walked away or paused, I guess, the negotiations. We would like to see them get back to the table and obviously come to a solution. But however, saying that, a lot of this is built around our food safety system, which every other country that we trade with recognizes that and has told us that Canadian flag and maple leaf on the front of the package has a set of standards, and and that is the marketing tool that we need, knowing what our product comes from and it's safe. And we are not about to jeopardize that and lower those standards to adhere to another country's wishes.
Is the issue to do with carcass washing, or is the issue to do with implants? What's the UK's gripe? What are they throwing our way, whether it's legit or not?
Yeah, both issues are on the table. For us, it's the biggest sticking point right now is carcass washes. They don't want to recognize that we use the system that's approved, and if there is going to be such a niche market of a hormone-free market, it's irrelevant if we can't send the product there because of our carcass wash and our food safety system. So what we'd really like to see is that get dealt with. As far as implants, the science is behind them; they're safe. And on a sustainable side of things, when you're knocking 60 days off of production, there is science that backs that up. That there is positive reasons to use those. If that's their prerogative that they choose not to have them, that is fine. But like I said, allow the consumer to be the ones to make the decision. They will righteously say whether they approve something or disapprove something, and not run it through the political realm.
Yeah, very good points. Now, before we wrap up here, are there any particular points that CCA is coming down here with to make sure you're educating is probably the wrong way, but when you're talking to some of your American counterparts where it's like, hey, we want to make sure that you guys understand where we're coming from on this. Maybe it's a point of disagreement, or because there's lots of things that NCBA and CCA do agree on, but are there some points that you're making sure you're hitting home this week?
Yeah, the voluntary product to the U.S. is the big one. Mexico has similar concerns as we do. The intent of the legislative being proposed, we understand what the intent is and the reasons behind it, but the overall consequences that potentially could come after this are the unknown. And what we're really fearful of is, as I stated earlier, we are the largest integrated beef movement nation in the world as far as the North American market, and we do not want to have any regulations in place that potentially could jeopardize that. We're at a point where there's been droughts, in the U.S. and in Canada, and we all know that our critical mass is down. We need to be able to move those cattle freely where feed is available. We need to be able to move those cattle back to where processing is available to keep our critical infrastructure rolling. So for us, we're really concentrating on that. And then obviously, one of the points that we will be watching if this does cross the finish line in the U.S. is any sort of segregation or injury. That gets us back to the WTO days where, we were really concerned about origin of labeling. And even though it's voluntary version of cool, the unintended consequences that may come out of this are something that we could become reality, and we'll have to address.
It's similar on Prop 12. When you have some sort of segregation, let's just pick on a plant like, say, Pasco, Washington, and there's Canadian live cattle going down to that plant. If you have to segregate, potentially that plant has to make a decision and say, well, how badly you could potentially, even though it's voluntary, you've forced a decision on them to say, well, we're not taking Canadian cattle anymore. And that is could be very, very harming to the Canadian side of the border. I'm not sure that's exactly what American producers want. Obviously, they're going to have their opinion on this, but there is a lot of unintended consequences.
Yeah, it's the unknown of the unknown. Until this gets in place, we won't know how, processors will react. We don't know how consumers will react. We don't know how much this will gain traction or what it'll overall look like. Maybe there'll be no uptake, but if there is uptake and we see that, that's the concerning part. Is we don't know the unknown right now, and we're fearful that there's any sort of jeopardization of the way we all collaborate and work together in this cattle market. The threats are real, and that's why we're down here working as hard as we are, trying to make sure that we limit any of those risks.
Back home on the ranch, how are things looking for this upcoming year? You optimistic?
We would love to have control over Mother Nature. Markets are strong. Our trade is strong. I don't think it's ever been stronger. We're working on the Indo-Pacific deal. Strategy that the federal government has put in. We've attended trade missions in South Korea, in Japan. We're heading back to South Korea. That's where the growth is in our trade and the value. So if we get a little moisture out west, and adequate weather across the rest of the country, should be a growing our herd kind of phase, and that's something we haven't seen in since '89. So I think all signals are there. We are in winter. There's always optimism as a farmer of the next growing season. So hopefully we get what we need and continue to prosper.
Yeah, well put, Nathan. Well put. Well, hey, enjoy yourself. Hopefully you get a chance to enjoy some of the nice winter weather here in Florida. Their version of it. Come here in the summer and you'll. That's a whole different kind of summer, but enjoy this beautiful weather, and I know you got lots of meetings and things happening here, so all the best to you. Good luck, and we'll chat with you again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Anytime. It's always a pleasure.